Today we're going to go over symptoms. And these aren't some random symptoms I found listed in an article on MD somewhere. These are straight from the horse's mouth, the proposed diagnostic criteria. I have a video on the whole criteria that you can find somewhere in my history. Basically, it's got 3 parts. 2 inclusion criteria, 1 exclusion. C is the exclusion criteria. It basically says it's not MD if the daydreaming is from something else, like medications, drugs, another disorder. B is the inclusion criteria that covers if your daydreaming causes distress and or dysfunction. The maladaptive in maladaptive daydreaming means you're maladapted. It's a bad thing for you. If you don't experience one or these 2 effects on your life, it's not MD. It's just the definition of it. But what we're going over is A, and A is the symptom domain. It covers a bunch of stuff that's really common to a lot of MDers. And if you have these symptoms, it can point to your daydreaming being maladaptive, that it's something you might possibly be diagnosed with. And we're using quotes because this is a proposed criteria. Maladaptive daydreaming is far from being listed as an official disorder, if it ever is. So A starts with maladaptive daydreaming is a persistent and recurrent fantasy activity that is vivid and fanciful, and the suspected maladaptive daydreamer will have 2 of the following symptoms in the past 6 months. Only one of these symptoms is mandatory to the diagnosis of MD, and that's the first one. Number 1 is that while you are daydreaming, you will experience an intense sense of absorption/immersion that causes visual, auditory, or affective properties. So right off the bat, we see that to be considered a maladaptive daydreamer, you have to already be an immersive daydreamer. I used to have a video on immersive versus maladaptive daydreaming, but it kind of sucked and I took it down. Ellie Somer at Somer Clinic made a much better one. I might remake one later. But basically, immersive daydreaming describes how you daydream with the absorption and the immersion. It's vivid in some way. It's all-encompassing in some way. And it's emotional. You can have this without being a maladaptive daydreamer. Lots of people are immersive daydreamers. It's just sort of a thing that some people can do. And it's totally normal and healthy. It turns into maladaptive daydreaming when you hit criteria B, that it causes distress or dysfunction. That's the difference. Maladaptive daydreaming is the bad stuff that comes with the daydreaming behavior, not the way we daydream. So in addition to this, there are another 7 symptoms, and you need to exhibit at least one of them. But honestly, most people are probably going to have several. And the first 2 kind of go hand in hand. So number 2 and number 3, we're going to kind of talk about together. 2, daydreaming is triggered, maintained, or enhanced by exposure to music. And 3, daydreaming is triggered, maintained, or enhanced with exposure to stereotypical movement. That's the pacing. It's not always pacing. It's just some sort of repetitive movement. And you'll see this listed as stereotypical movement, like they say here in the criteria, or as kinesthetic movement. So the reason these 2 we're doing hand in hand is because they both fulfill the same need, triggered, maintained, or enhanced. The idea behind both of them is that they sort of get the daydreamer in like a semi-trance-like state. You think of shamans, what do? They drum and they dance until they reach trance. Kind of low-key similar. The music and the movement, it helps you block out external stimuli. The music especially provides sort of these emotional input points. It's not just a one-faceted thing. It's got many aspects to it. You've got the beat and melody and lyrics all working together to get to you. And even people without maladaptive daydreaming get absorbed in music. We just take the extra step of using it as a vehicle to further, our own imagery. 4, often daydreams when distressed or bored. So this is kind of a callback to what might be driving maladaptive daydreaming. In some cases, it could be stress. It could be that maladaptive daydreaming is a coping mechanism that has just gone haywire and outlived its usefulness. And so when you are distressed, it provides relief for you, which is a very good thing on the surface. But because it's maladaptive, what it does is cause this, feedback loop of providing more distress. It's only a temporary band-aid. And the boredom, think ADHD. A lot of maladaptive daydreamers also have ADHD, particularly inattentive. And you may just need somewhere for your mind to go. You're bored, but nothing else quite holds your attention like a daydream does. And so you'll fall into that and get wrapped up in it. 5, daydreaming intensity and length intensify when the maladaptive daydreamer is alone. And that makes sense, right? You can go deeper when you're alone. You make all your weird faces and whispery sounds, walk around looking like a crazy person, nobody around to judge you. There are a subset of maladaptive daydreamers who will daydream in the presence of others. It kind of just hums in the background all day and surfaces when you're not directly focused on something else. So you can and will daydream even if you're like speaking to someone. But this is a subset. Most people will do it in the quieter hours when they are alone, even seek out solitude to do it. 6, is annoyed when interrupted or unable to daydream. And this is kind of an addiction thing. You've got that urge to do it and you can't, or you were in it and somebody stopped you from finishing. So you don't get the satisfaction out of it. And it causes a physical reaction. You get mad, maybe just slightly annoyed, maybe really angry. But this anger is sort of, it's a red flag for an addictive type behavior. In an ideal situation, you wouldn't be upset. You'd just be like, oh, crap, I got to do that now. All right, I'll just finish this later. And it shouldn't be that big a deal, but it is to the maladaptive daydreamer, or is to a lot of maladaptive daydreamers. 7, would rather daydream than engage in social, academic, or professional activities or chores. Maladaptive daydreamers tend to prioritize their daydreaming over everything else in their life, or over certain aspects of their life. And that's why it sort of lists all of them separately, because you can do fantastic in school and have an absolutely awful social life because for years you chose to go home and daydream rather than build social relationships. Or vice versa. Maybe you're real social, but you struggle at work or in school because in one of these areas, or maybe all of these areas, the daydreaming fix is more important. And 8, has made repeated and unsuccessful attempts to stop, curb, or control their daydreaming. This one's a little, because some people don't recognize it for what it is, especially when they're young. I know that makes me sound like, get off my lawn, but as your responsibilities shift and the consequences get worse and worse, it's easier to see the impact that it's having directly on your life. In the life of most maladaptive daydreamers, before they discover the term at least, there usually comes a point where they're like, this might be not great. Maybe I should just like not do that as much. And that's when they discover the horrible truth that they can't stop. It doesn't matter what they want. They're in it. And that is a sneaky thing about maladaptive daydreaming is it comes up on you. It's subtle at first. You don't really realize you have a problem until you're kind of too deep to dig yourself out alone. Not to say you can't. There are people out there with incredible willpower. I don't know how they do it, but they do. But even they were probably just as surprised the first time they ever tried to stop daydreaming when they found out that this was not going to be as easy as they thought it was. And there are a bunch of other things that you could call a sign or a symptom of MD. But these are the ones, the 8 that are listed specifically in the proposed diagnostic criteria. And there's a few things I want to point out about it. So don't click away just yet. 1, this is not a checklist. You don't go down the list and go, got that, and then decide if you have MD based on how many checks you hit. That might sound obvious, but I see a lot of people make this mistake where they'll be like, oh, I meet all of these symptoms. I must be a maladaptive daydreamer. Weird that it never bothered me. It's actually really great for my life because they didn't read further. They didn't read B, distress or dysfunction. Or they'll be like, I checked off all 8 of these. I must have severe maladaptive daydreaming, but it causes me distress, but not that much. I didn't think I was that severe. And vice versa. I only checked off 1, but this really impacts my life. It's ruining me. Like, why am I coming out mild? Not how it works. It's not the more that you hit, the more severe it is. Remember, you only need 2 of those to be a maladaptive daydreamer, and they aren't what decide the intensity. It's how it affects your life. So you can have all of these, but it affects your life just a little bit, so you're kind of on the mild side, Or you can have just one of these, but it's intense and horrible and severe. And the second thing I want to point out is not a single one of these criteria talks about the contents of your daydream. The first one, a little bit, it says you have to be an immersive daydreamer, that it's visual or effective or something. But none of them are like daydreams about celebrities, makes up original characters, violent daydreams, romantic daydreams, third person, first person. It doesn't matter. The content doesn't matter. Personally, it will make a difference to you. Themes might even be something you want to explore with, a therapist or something. But in a more broad sense, it's just not part of how you would diagnose maladaptive daydreaming. And there we go. That's the official symptom domain thus far. I'll put a link to the diagnostic criteria down in the description so you can take a look at it yourself. And that's kind of it. So, bye.